Hello and welcome to a very special episode of Betwixt the Gavel. I'm Andy Gavrin, Vice President of the Lower Merion Township Board of Commissioners. This week we're actually joined by two guests, one here right now and one on the second half of the show. We're going to start by talking with the Township's historic preservation expert, Greg Prichard. Greg, thank you for joining me.
Sure, thanks so much for having me, Commissioner Gavrin.
Of course, and Andy is sufficient. I will, you have a very interesting role within the township. I know when I talk to my kids about what do they want to be when they grow up, the thought of being a historic expert never crosses their mind. It's not something that, you think about a lot as a kid, but it's a really important role. How did you get into this role? What is your role within the township?
So the role of historic preservation planner is to oversee planning projects that deal with historic resources in the township, to maintain the historic resource inventory, which is the list of historically designated properties within the township, and also to be the staff liaison to the two advisory boards that oversee those resources, which are the Historical Commission, or HC, and the Historical Architectural Review Board, or the HARB. The HC deals with historic properties that are scattered throughout the township, and the HARB deals with the 7 historic districts in the township.
Gotcha.
So a little bit about me. I grew up in Wayne, in Radnor Township, in a historic neighborhood. I became really fascinated at a young age with the history of that area, and especially the architecture and how those neighborhoods developed. And it grew from there. I went to Cornell University and received a master's in historic preservation planning. And while I was there, I wrote my thesis on the train stations of the main line between Overbrook and Paoli. So, of course, many of those are within Lower Merion Township. So it was really a natural fit to come here.
Great. Well, I'll start with Go Big Red. Lower Merion, we talk about the history a lot. It's a very historic area. Can you tell us a little bit about Lower Merion's history and why it's so important?
Yeah, so the boundaries of the township contain many different towns and neighborhoods, and each one has its own kind of separate, unique character. So, of course, there's Bryn Mawr and Ardmore, which were developed along the turnpike and the railroad. But then you have a place like Gladwin, which has a much different feel to it. It's kind of an early 19th century crossroads village that hasn't really changed that much over the years. Yeah. And of course, there are neighborhoods that some of which were planned very deliberately and designed a very specific way, and others that developed over time incrementally, and they have their own character too. So it's a really interesting place with all these diverse kind of communities that all come together to make this one township.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think one thing we do, we have, I guess, 3 sets of designated historic properties. Obviously, we have other historic properties that aren't necessarily designated, but we have Class 1, Class 2, and, as you alluded to before, historic districts. Can you tell us what's the difference between a Class 1 property, a Class 2 property, and how do let's start with that. How do Class 1 and Class 2 differ from each other?
Yeah, so basically when the Township and the Historical Commission are reviewing which properties should be designated as historic resources, they refer to a list of 10 criteria which are listed in the code. If they reach a certain number of criteria, they're eligible to be Class 2 resources, but if they are eligible to meet more of those criteria, then they can become Class 1 resources. And Class 1 resources are, they have more protection than Class 2 resources. The commissioners could, for example, deny an application to demolish a Class 1 resource. So there are about almost 400 Class 1 resources, which includes properties within historic districts, which are classified the same way in the code. And there are over 700 Class 2 resources in the township. Wow. So, again, those are scattered all throughout the township, from Villanova down to Merion Station and Bala Cynwyd. Some examples of Class 1 resources include Maybrook, the mansion just north of Wynwood train station, for example. St. Charles Seminary, which is very much on the commissioner's docket these days and will continue to be, and Baldwin School. So it's mostly those larger institutional properties. It does include some residences and commercial buildings as well. A couple examples of Class 2 properties that the Historical Commission has reviewed recently are the Bryn Mawr Freight Station, which is beside Bryn Mawr train station, which has been a series of restaurants over the years. It's about to become another one, and the Commission's been reviewing changes to the building for that. And of course, there are many homes and even some public schools that are on that list of Class 2 resources as well.
Gotcha. No, that's very helpful. Thank you. And I think, so those Class 1 really are the ones when people think about the main properties of Lower Merion. Those are the Class 1s, right? The seminary, those in Baldwin, those are the ones that really stick out. Yeah, the
places when you think of historic Lower Merion sites, those are typically the ones that come to mind.
Okay. And so how does a historic district fit into this whole kind of process?
Well, historic districts have been around in Lower Merion for longer than individual historic resources have been. We've only had Class 1 and 2 resources since 2000, when the Historical Commission was established. But our first historic district came to be in 1962, and that was Harriton. And a couple more were added in 1980, and a couple more have been added since then. There are a total now of 7 historic districts in the township. They range from residential neighborhoods to commercial centers, and some have a mix of those. So, for example, Haverford Station District has a commercial street as well as a neighborhood of residential homes beside it. The Ardmore Commercial Center Historic District is the kind of the main downtown core of Ardmore. And Gladwin is another where there are commercial entities within the district, but there are also residences. Yeah. So it's a variety, and English Village is the most recently added one, which is a really unique residential neighborhood.
So if you live in a historically designated property or a historic district, what can and can't you do? Is there anything you can't do to your house? Can you just go and do whatever you want, or how does that work?
There are certain things that have to be reviewed by the Ardmore Historical Commission. They're all exterior changes, so they don't review any interior changes to a property. They also don't review anything like paint colors. That's, I think, a major concern that people have when they're buying a historic house. They think there will be some kind of color palette that they have to adhere to, but that's not the case. In our historic districts, at least, some places do that, but not us. Okay. So things like repairs, replacements in kind, they don't review, but if someone's replacing windows or siding or changing a material of some architectural element, that is the kind of thing that's reviewed. And of course, additions and demolitions as well, which we don't see too often, but sometimes we do.
Gotcha. So if you live in a house and you say, hey, I know I live in this historic property because I love it and I want to protect it, why would you designate it? Even in the first place, are there advantages to doing so? Is there any reason to designate your property as a historic property?
Yeah, so I've been talking about regulations on these properties, but there are also incentives that we make available to owners of historic properties. So, for example, I'll talk about 2 different kinds of incentives. There are use incentives. So, for example, if you would like to add an accessory dwelling on your property, so if, for example, there's a living space above an historic carriage house on the property, then you can do that if it's a contributing part of that historic property. It requires a review of the Historical Commission and approval of the Board of Commissioners, as well as what we call a conditional use process. Right. But that's one of the things that's available. Another is code relief, which includes things like setback relief and impervious coverage relief, which allows people to modernize existing buildings as opposed to tearing them down and starting over to build anew. So if a house is set already within a setback, for example, but the homeowner would like to build an addition to kind of continue that nonconformity with this process, they can apply to do that. And it wouldn't normally be allowed, but if it's an historically designated property, they can go through that process.
Gotcha. So you talk about somebody can apply. So if you live in a historic property but it's not designated, or if you live in a historically designated property and you want to do an addition, change the windows, replace the roof, whatever it might be, what do you do? Where do you go? Who do you contact? What do you do about that?
Yeah, so that's part of my job as the historic preservation planner, to help people through that process, to assign the agendas for the Historical Commission and the HARB, and to kind of shepherd them through that process all the way to the end. Actually, many of the most recent additions to the inventory have come about because of this process. People have wanted to do things like add an accessory dwelling to a property, and they've applied to first add the property to the inventory. The commission determines whether or not it's eligible to be added, and then the process moves on from there.
Gotcha. Okay. So I know, sadly, time flies when you're talking about history. I think there's a joke in there somewhere. But anything else you want to add, or anything we need to, that you'd like to share about your time here and the historic properties in the township?
Yeah, so I guess I'd say I've always known that Lower Merion is a unique place. My mom grew up here. My grandparents lived in Rosemont, and I was always visiting. But I didn't really understand how special this place was until I started working for the township. And it's not only unique for its historic character, but also the devotion that the community has for maintaining that character, and particularly on the part of the Board of Commissioners. So I thank you and the other commissioners for your support of what we do.
No, and thank you, because the expertise, we're not coming in with any expertise whatsoever, and we rely very heavily on you, on the boards that, the advisory boards that we have, both with in this area and every other area, whether it's environmentalism, shade tree, anything else. So your expertise is invaluable, and we're very lucky to have you here. So sadly, this segment is history, and we're going to go to break, and we'll be right back with another wonderful member of our building and planning department. We'll see you soon. Hello and welcome back to this month's episode of Beside the Gavel. I'm still Andy Gavrin, Vice President of the Lower Merion Township Board of Commissioners, and for you eagle-eyed viewers, you will see that this is not Greg Pritchard anymore. Through the magic of television, Greg has been replaced with our, I would say, Senior Planner and Czar of Economic Development, Jillian Dierks. Thanks for joining us, Jillian.
Thank you for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure. So this new role, the Czar role, as I will call it, it's a new promotion. You've recently gotten promoted. Congratulations.
Yes, thank you.
Can you tell us a little bit about your role within building and planning?
Yeah, so for the past 10 plus years, I have been working in the planning department as a planner. My role has been focused primarily on large-scale commercial and residential projects, mainly land development review, land use. And now I will be transitioning to work more on commercial projects only, and working more closely with the business improvement districts to promote economic development within the township.
That's great. Well, we're lucky to have you in that role.
Thank you.
So I know from working with you, there are a lot of big projects on your plate and on the plate of building and planning. A lot on City Line Avenue, redevelopment of St. Charles. But I want to spend, we don't have that much time. I'd like to spend a lot of our time on the Ardmore master plan, because I know that's going to be taking up a lot of your time, and it's crucial to the future of Lower Merion. So can you give us a bit of an overview on the Ardmore master plan?
So we are so excited to have started working on this project. The Ardmore master planning process began earlier this spring with the selection of Kittleson Associates as the consultant for the project. And we've recently started our public engagement for the Ardmore Master Plan. Kittleson has begun their analysis of existing conditions. We have been hosting steering committee meetings, a steering committee is comprised of local business owners, community members, and local stakeholders. And kind of understanding their roles within the community, the impacts that they have felt from changing Ardmore, and then coming on this next Tuesday, June 21st, we are hosting an open house during the day where the community members can come, interact with planning staff, learn a little bit more about the master planning process. And then in the evening, we're having a community charrette. It's a visioning charrette. Charrette is a big word that people
I was going to ask you about that.
want to know more about, but essentially a charrette is a workshop. It's a term design professionals use. It's a workshop where the consultant will lead us through a visioning process to understand the strengths, opportunities, threats, weaknesses that people are experiencing in Ardmore.
So just got to interrupt you for a second. Despite all my protestations, they refused to air my show live. So we're actually, while we are taping it, don't tell anyone, we're taping this in June before these events happen. This is going on the air in July. So if you were unable to attend the charrette and the other events in June, is there a way to see what happened or still provide input if you're not part of the steering committee?
Yes, there are going to be many opportunities. There will also be a charrette that's going to be held in the fall. We currently have an online comment map that is hosted on the Township website, and that is www.lowermerion.org/AMP for Ardmore Master Plan. You can access the comment map there and leave your comments, your ideas, your thoughts about Ardmore. The comment map has amazed me. It's full of such great ideas from the community. So those, we also have a staff email that you can send your thoughts, comments, and that is
even if you don't remember it, it's on the screen right now, so don't worry about it. I'm sure our crack staff behind the scene, the goons, have it up on the screen right now.
So I would definitely recommend checking out the website to see all of the upcoming opportunities to participate.
And would you say that the residents are amped up for this?
Oh, yes. I mean,
have you been making a lot of amp jokes?
We have been. We really believe that the more people that are involved in this process, the more reflective it'll be of the community's wants and desires for Ardmore. So we are really pushing for community involvement. And I know sometimes people feel as though, there's so many things to be involved in right now, but this is a big project for Ardmore, and we really wanted to reflect the community's desires.
So a question I have about it is, so Ardmore's seen a resurgence in the past few years, right?
Yeah.
New restaurants, new apartments, new everything, new coffee shops, new really great businesses coming in, a lot of people on the street. With all this that's been done, why do we even need a master plan? Like, what's the purpose of this after having already seen this resurgence?
That's a great question. In the 1990s to 2000s, a lot of that staff work and consultant work went into economic development of Ardmore, trying to get a more vibrant Ardmore, and now we're here.
Right.
A lot of those goals have been achieved. So this is looking 10 years in the future. How do we want Ardmore to change to reflect the current community's desires? Maybe that's additional public space. Maybe that's additional outdoor activity space or streetscape improvements. We've seen a lot of development in Ardmore. Is it reflective of what we want? Do we need to tweak the zoning code to get what the community actually desires?
Gotcha. So it's exciting, and as you said before, Ardmore is really the center of our township, and as Ardmore goes, we all go. So I think it is important to really have that plan moving forward and the foresight. So it's great that we're doing this. And so in terms of the boundary, when I think of Ardmore, you have the historic area in the middle of Ardmore. Yes. You have Suburban Square, and then kind of you have it extending out towards Haverford and Bryn Mawr, and then extending out towards Wynwood. Where are the boundaries of what we're looking at and kind of what we're doing with this plan?
So the plan is really focused on the commercial district, and that includes Suburban Square. It does not follow the boundaries of AI, Ardmore Initiative, or the Historic District. It extends a little bit towards Wynwood, as well as a little bit towards Haverford. Okay. But it's primarily focused on Lancaster Avenue, with the exception of Suburban Square.
Gotcha. Okay. So wait, with the exception of Suburban Square?
Oh, with the inclusion of
Suburban With the inclusion,
Square.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Gotcha. So I won't talk to our prior guest who was here and talk about that you're excluding the historic district from the plan, or is it included?
It's included. It expands upon.
Gotcha. Okay. Gotcha. Sorry about that. So good. I will tell our prior guest about that it's included.
Greg Prichard, the historic preservationist, has been involved in this process, and we're happy to have him on board, as well as all of the amazing recommendations of the advisory boards, the historic advisory boards, HARB and the HC.
No, and as I talked about in our first segment, the advisory, we're so lucky to have these great advisory boards who are providing so much input.
So many amazing people in the community volunteer their time to make this such a great place to live.
Yeah. So what are you talked kind of in general, and I don't know if you can even get into the specifics, but in general you talked about kind of what the master plan is. Are there any specific things that we're looking to get out of this plan? Is it, you mentioned green space, is it connectivity between different parts of Ardmore? What are like some of the key things that we're hoping to get out of it, or do we not even know that yet?
I mean, I do think there's some themes that we're definitely gravitating towards that are driven from the 2016 comprehensive plan: pedestrian connectivity, access to multimodal transit, bus and train access, things that allow us to have a healthier community. I do think civic space is going to be a big element to this. A lot of what we've heard is a desire for a local community green within Ardmore. Streetscapes improvements are something we look at very closely with every land development project that comes through. How can we get the right amount of streetscape that allows for community interaction, greening, stormwater management, all of those elements.
Gotcha. So last time we did a master plan with, I believe, the Bryn Mawr master plan a number of years ago. I don't think you were involved with that.
I was not. I was not involved with that.
But do you know, like, have we used that as a basis at all for this one, or? So
maybe not a basis for this, but I would say I've used the Bryn Mawr master plan so much. It's such a great planning document, and it really has held withstood the test of time. I mean, with every land development project that we have looked at in Bryn Mawr, it's such a great document to go back to and say, what did the community envision this would be, and how was this considered through that master planning process? So yeah, I think that is a great one to follow, and I hope that we can kind of achieve what that master plan had achieved.
Yeah, and I bet we will. So, and I don't want you to get pigeonholed only into the Ardmore master plan. Are there any other projects, we don't have much time left, any other projects on your plate that you're really excited about or really challenging to you?
So as you mentioned before, we've seen a lot of growth in the City Avenue district. There's a number of different projects that are happening there. And I've really enjoyed coordinating with the different developers. I mean, staff has been really hands-on trying to ensure that everything lines up and meets the goals of the community as stated through the City Avenue district, which is about 10 years old now. So we're starting to look at and reevaluate how our anticipated growth, what the anticipated growth was, what is the current growth, how we could adjust things to get what the community needs.
Well, as much as I'd love to continue this conversation, the LMTV guys are once again kind of ready to ring the gong on me and cut me off yet again. We're out of time. I've been so amped up to talk to you. Thank you to everybody for joining us for Beside the Gavel, and we will see you next month.